Hello and welcome to Faux News. I'm your host, Bo Hughes. A number of things to discuss today. The Charlie Kirk assassination, the most recent election results, and potentially some other topics. We'll see how this goes. I'm just going to meander a little bit. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the Charlie Kirk assassination. Um, After looking over the course of the last 2 months at all of the available evidence, all of the video, all the commentary, everything that's been released to the public, I think we still have too many unanswered and suspicious questions for the official narrative being given to us by the FBI um, for it to be an open and closed case. Um, I know I'm far from alone in this, but what I continue to dislike the most, and I felt this way from day one, was these images of Tyler Robinson purportedly in the black shirt and the skinny jeans. We've all seen these photos taken from surveillance video. That these photos do not seem to show that he has a disassembled gun stashed away on his person. Again, he's wearing skinny jeans, a relatively tight shirt, not some gigantic, winter coat or trench coat, nothing of the sort. And yet we're supposed to believe that he has a 30-06 disassembled and in his pants and possibly up his shirt in the back, maybe underneath his backpack. Um, some of those photos seem to reveal perhaps a subtle protrusion on the back of his leg that people say that could be the gun barrel. Um, Again, I feel like these photos, it would be hard to conceal a disassembled 30-06. You would see it in these photos when you know that you're supposed to be looking for it. I firmly believe that. Also, I never like the fact that though these photos are from CCTV footage, we have never seen the actual video footage, just these still shots. And why is that? Well, I have to question if it's because if you were to see the video when he's in motion, particularly going up and down some of these stairs, it would blow the lid off this theory that he has a gun stashed on his person. Because when you see him in motion, uh, you would be able to tell that much more easily than just from still shots, whether or not there really is a gun barrel and a stock, etc., stashed in numerous places on his person. Um, and there really is no good reason for that. If we can have the still shots, then we can have the video. That's very disconcerting to me. Um, Another thing I always thought was very strange was how the infamous video where it shows him from a distance after he has taken the shot and then running across the roof and dropping down. Um, I never liked the fact that there ostensibly was literally a person on security detail in a video room somewhere that was moving. They saw an object, a person running across the roof, and despite sitting in front of a display of who knows how many different security feeds in real time, they had the happenstance to take that video camera and manually pan it as he's running across the roof because that's what was done. That camera is stationary. It has to be manually panned by someone. It doesn't have like a motion sensor on it that if someone is running across the roof, it's going to go with it and pan with that object. So again, crazy things happen in this world. That could be pure coincidence. They could have seen suspicious activity, perhaps on the video surveillance on the roof several moments before that, so they knew to be paying attention to that area. And then when they saw someone sprinting across the roof, their eyes were already on that camera, and so they panned with that person that was running. That's possible, but also, in my opinion, very unlikely. And I always thought that was strange. Then there's also people that point out the fact that at one point in that video, his shadow disappears on the roof. He has a shadow, and then he drops down onto the slightly lower level that's like this opaque white surface, and there's no shadow. Um, that also is a little bit odd. I tried to look into this a little bit. I'm certainly not a materials engineer or expert on building materials, etc. If there's a possibility that some materials would not have produce any sort of shadow on them because they do not reflect light. I don't know. I have heard numerous people point that out, and that also is a little bit strange. The final thing that's strange about that video is that despite that it's grainy CCTV footage and taken from a fair distance away, when he goes to drop down from the roof with the rifle still ostensibly still assembled, completely assembled, he's just taken the shot underneath a towel. There are numerous moments in this several seconds where he goes to drop down from the roof, where again, the video quality is not the best, but I think it's hard to pass that he has a towel or a rifle underneath that towel. I think we should be able to make out a little bit more of the outline than we can in that video. Um, an outline of a rifle. It would be jutting out a little bit more from underneath that towel, protruding a little bit. Um, when you watch that, really, it just looks like he has a towel sort of stretched out like this and kind of in one hand, and that there's not an object as large as a rifle underneath it. Um, so that's those two things I mentioned, I guess, are primarily in terms of the physical evidence that's been released to the public. These still shots in the video, again, purportedly of Tyler Robinson, both before and immediately after the shooting. Some other things I don't like about it are that whoever carried this out knew the UVU campus layout for sure. Um, the first of all, it's tragic what happened, of course, and that venue should never have been chosen. There were so many exposed rooftops around there. It was just a horrible place to have that event. And then you had, Charlie down there at the bottom of this pit, this amphitheater, that it could have been the target of even things from someone in the crowd in the amphitheater, the way it angled downward. It was just that from a security standpoint, that venue never should have been chosen. And whoever carried out this shooting certainly knew the venue beforehand, that it had these weaknesses and that it shouldn't have been chosen. And the details on that have also never been released to the public. Now, I'm not one of these kind of immature, irrational people that expect all the details of what is in effect a criminal investigation to be released to the public. I don't expect that. However, certainly for something that's as high profile as this, I think we should have far more given to us than we currently do, and then we're going to get it all at this point because it's 2 months after the fact now. And one of those things that I'm alluding to in that comment is the fact that so you have someone that knew the UVU campus layout, right? Okay, well, if they knew what that layout was, they either had co-conspirators, people that gave them information about the layout of the campus and basically said, "Hey, Charlie Kirk's going to be here. This is where they're going to have him do his Turning Point event. This is the layout. We're evil people, and this would be a prime place to come and commit this atrocity." And that opens Pandora's box because then you're opening about the box of co-conspirators, which at this point they're still telling us that at least there's no definitive evidence to point to that, which I and many other people question a lot. So you either have that scenario, or you have the scenario that Tyler Robinson had been there before September 10th because he lives 4 hours away. He's not going to just drive up there on a whim and scout the campus in and bring a rifle with them, by the way, and scout the campus in the morning and then decide, okay, yeah, this is feasible. It's a green light. I'm going to commit this because lo and behold, there's rooftops all over the place. And in fact, I even went there this morning, and one of the rooftops is a pedestrian walkway. All I have to do is jump this little partition area to a restricted part of the roof, and I will have eyes on Charlie Kirk and the entire event. Um, that, like most things, is that possible? Yes. What is the probability of that? Again, it's a 4 hour drive. You're going to just hop in the car, drive 4 hours with the hunting rifle with you. The likelihood of that, doing it off the whim and doing all the reconnaissance on the morning of the killing, is next to none. So that means, therefore, that two things. Either he had co-conspirators that told him about the layout of the campus, where on the campus the event was going to be taking place, or he had been to the campus himself in the weeks, months prior. So, and also that he knew where this turning point event, the layout of the event itself, that it was going to take place at that amphitheater and that Charlie was going to be sitting down at the bottom of the amphitheater. He had to have foreknowledge of those things. So, um, what I want to know is why there has not been any data released to the public in terms of his comings and goings out of Orem, Utah before September 10th, if there are any. The Dodge Charger that he was driving, most of these newer vehicles have location data on them that they're able to pull. I have to believe that that car is new enough that they would be able to pull that data. I could be wrong on that, but I think that is probably the case, which also is one thing I really don't like about newer vehicles, how everything is electronic and computerized. It's very Orwellian, these newer vehicles. And we're talking new, like, shoot, things that were made within the last 10 years, maybe even farther back. But I digress. That's a whole nother topic. But I think there's a very high likelihood that that vehicle is new enough and they would be able to pull the location data on it. And that is one thing that I do think should have been released to the public, because if that vehicle, of course, he could have taken another vehicle, maybe, or a bus, who knows, to Orem at some point, but that's unlikely. If that vehicle prior to September 10th had never been to Orem or on the UVU campus, or near it anyway, that's a huge red flag, and they don't add up very well. Also, the cell phone data. That's a huge one. That should have been released within days, in my opinion, of when he was taken into custody. Okay, this is our guy. We feel very confident that this is our guy. Supposedly, they even had a confession the night that he turned himself in. So the way they projected it to the public is basically they were 100% certain this was the guy. He had even confessed to it to his family members. So, but there was no cell phone data released to the public. That absolutely, even more than the vehicle data, should have been released. And we have none of that. Has this phone ever been to Orem? If it has, prior to September 10th, what were the dates? That's pretty basic fundamental information. And nothing, zilch. So, I think that covers all the biggest red flags that I have about that. Well, then of course there's all this fallout, like no one knows where the roommate is. I don't exactly know, and I think it varies from state to state, but the sort of protocol on the publicly available knowledge of an autopsy, if that's something that usually is held on to until a case goes to trial before the public really gets any sort of information on it. I don't know the details on that, but there are people medical examiners or people in that line of work that have said, I believe this is correct, that yes, we should have like official autopsy information at this point, to the point that some people are saying that an autopsy wasn't even done. We also have people saying that, Charlie's neck, the guy that supposedly did the autopsy, I think, saying his neck was like Superman, which is why he was able to stop this 30-06 round and not have it, go completely through him and potentially hit either something or someone else behind the tent. Um, and I think that comes from, they say an autopsy was done, but again, I've heard other people in that line of work say that there should be like an official document that should have been released to the public at this point that experts can go in and look at and, look at the notes and corroborate. And we have none of that. Um, and I don't want to get too much into the body language of people at the event because, everybody's different. And I think we live in an age where this is cliche, but I think there's truth to it. People just live their lives on their phone and they have trouble kind of finding the on switch, let's say, so that when a tragedy like that happens right in front of your eyes, I think people respond to it because they're constantly ensconced in this digital alternate reality that they react to things, tragic events like this, that happen before their eyes nowadays, different than I think they would have even a decade or two ago. I think that has to be taken into account. And again, fight or flight responses, people have different coping mechanisms. You never know how people are going to respond. That's a large bit of, what basic military training is when they throw you into combat, you got people, the bullets start flying, they know that you're going to respond at all and, respond relatively calmly and keep your training in your head and keep your wits about yourself. That being said, I have to say some of the body language that people have done endless videos on, particularly of some of the Turning Point staff that was there, it does raise alarms because of how bizarre and nonchalant some of the body language is. It's very strange at best. And I did want to just briefly mention that and touch on that, but without going into it any further than that. But very, very strange to see someone get killed right in front of you. And the other thing too about it is not just seeing that tragedy happen in front of you, but in real time, you have no idea if it's just going to be one shot or if there's going to be numerous shots. You could be in a mass casualty situation where people are shooting at you and the other people around you. And for there to be this nonchalant behavior on the part of some of the people at that event is very weird. And I'll just leave it at that, I think. Um, and without naming names, let's just leave that there. Um, I think that covers the biggest points in my mind on that whole tragedy, without getting down in the weeds too much. Um, I really the lack of cell phone data, location data from his phone, that really bothers me. Um, And then, of course, we didn't even get into the ballistics of, all types of people, Green Berets, people that shoot guns for a living, talking about how, 30-06 bullet would have had catastrophic damage that we wouldn't even, uh, the video probably never would even been released to the public. That's how bad and gruesome it would have been. Um, and I've heard detractors to that say something. I think the correct terminology is soft point or soft tip bullet. He could have used that, and that's designed to kind of go into the body and produce a lot of damage within the body, but doesn't have basically the penetration ability of your standard full metal jacket 30-06 round. Um, Not a ballistics expert by any means, but that also is another very odd element to this that a lot of people have talked about, and a lot of people with knowledge on that topic that say that also raises a lot of questions. Um, okay, I think that fully covers Charlie Kirk. I don't know when the first um, sort of meat and potatoes of that trial begins. I don't know that we have a date for it yet. But that will be, I'll do an update on that when that time comes because At this point, I'm going to somewhat try to believe in the authorities and that we will get more of this information given to us at that time, and that they're just holding on to it at this point because it's an ongoing investigation. Um, could not be the case, and the public is justified in having a lot of the suspicions that they're having, but I think at this point we'll see what happens when it goes to trial. Um, okay, the election results. That's the other big thing on the agenda. Um, it didn't surprise me at all, unfortunately, that the Republicans got their asses handed to them in this election because of how much tumult and upheaval Trump is causing. Now, that doesn't mean that upheaval wasn't necessary and that it was incredibly prudent on the part of America to have that upheaval. Uh, I have given my viewpoints on this channel before that I tend to lean conservative. I've never been the biggest Trump fan. There's a lot of things that I don't like about him, the way he goes about business. But this country has a lot of problems, and just going along like business as usual, there's not much wrong, certainly was not the way to go. And I think by and large, a lot of the things that he has undertaken and done needed to be done. That being said, we live in a basically complacent and very often entitled society that, I'm sorry to say it, but in a lot of ways has had it too good for too long. And so people just assume that massive actions don't need to be taken. That's why the debt is, pushing $38 trillion dollars. And the average American, I don't think really cares about that. Instead, they want to complain about the price of Barbies at Christmas. That's literally the society that we're living in. But saying that is sort of trying to frame, the atmosphere that those elections took place in. That being that even a lot of people that voted for Trump, I think, are sort of a little bit wishy-washy on their support for him right now. So it's not surprising that the Democrats had a landslide election. Um, One thing that I guess nothing should surprise me at this point, but one thing that was incredibly upsetting and surprising was the fact that Jay Jones in Virginia actually won as the attorney general candidate after the borderline political threat, human life threat comments that he made that several years ago that were released to the public. That was very disappointing and surprising, but like I said, I guess at this point I won't be surprised by anything anymore. Um, yeah. Uh, I would like to make a few comments about female voting and how it is destroying Western society, but I think that's for another video. Yeah, I'm gonna have to think about how to articulate that well, but I think that's enough of an allusion to what I'm talking. Most people will know what I'm talking about there. We'll just say that 53% of the voters in Virginia voted for Winsome Earl Sears, and yet Spanberger won, I believe it was over 10 points. I think it was by 11 points. And for the life of me, you can say all you want about abortion and some of these other issues, but to stand up there at these events like you did on your victory night speech with three teenage daughters behind you and say that you're on board with the Marxist cult platform, that's really what the Democrats have devolved into, platform that you're on board with dudes being in your girls' locker room at school and everywhere else is just indicative of the overall groupthink that is required, I think, to make any sort of headway on the left. Um, and that also could be talked about at length. Let's do that some other time. Um, that actually is a nice segue. Speaking of groupthink, uh, it really irritates me. Both sides are guilty of the same types of things many times. Like, you can't tell me that Republicans haven't gerrymandered states in a very immoral way, at least in years past, and that they don't do some of the same tricks that the Democrats do. Um, gerrymandering is something that there's going to have to be federal legislation, I think, should be passed about that to sort of make it more sensical and ensure that states comply with that, doing it in a common sense way. It's sort of how, like, school districts, they'll build a nice new school, and then the kids that literally can throw a football and hit that school a lot of times won't go there because they're of a lower socioeconomic class, and they want to purposely draw the district up so the kids from the gated communities and the higher socioeconomic case strata that might live 10 miles away are the ones that go to that new school. It's very similar to that. That also is obviously wrong and shouldn't go on. It's also very inefficient too. But that's something that I doubt anything will be done on, from an amendment standpoint, because it's a certainly a quagmire. But from a theoretical standpoint, something long ago should have been done on that and needs to be. Um, I sort of got off track a little bit. The next thing I wanted to talk about, and it was in terms of this groupthink that you see on the left. It really irritates me when I see the right doing the same things that you see on the left. Because if anything, I think the right's biggest chances for success in this totally polar anymore world that we have is to stick to common sense, the moral high ground, and to not do some of the same types of underhanded things that the left does. Don't engage in, monkeys in the cage, feces throwing, basically. Um, and one other one is groupthink. Allow the freedom of ideas and true free speech to exist on the right, because that is classic liberalism. That is what the Western civilization was founded upon, and what has produced the most prosperous and best societies the world has ever seen. And that is supposedly what you are supporting and trying to project to the public, that those values are being lost, encroached upon, and that it's destroying Western civilization, and basically. And if you're going to make that argument, then you need to defend free speech. You need to defend those pillars of classical liberalism. So one thing that really irritated me recently is how people on the right are absolutely losing their shit over the fact that Tucker Carlson interviewed Nick Fuentes. Couple things about that irritate me. First, let me give the preface that Nick Fuentes is sort of like Andrew Tate, in my opinion. He has said some very inappropriate things that are so off the deep end that I think he's got some mental issues. But he's an interesting character because he also, it can be very articulate and even have some good insight into some issues. One thing I think he does have a lot of good insight into is sort of this disconnect that exists in the Christian evangelical uh, body within the United States, primarily for its like complete support for Israel without any sort of knowledge on the situation. That's one thing I've heard him talk about that I think he does a good job explaining and describing, that I really have not heard um, articulated as well, I don't think, by anyone else. Um, that being said, am largely pro-Israel. Let's just put that out there so that I don't get attacked. A great book, in fact, on this that I'll do in another video is On Democracies and Death Cults by Douglas Murray. I believe it's his newest book, came out this year. It's about Israel. It's excellent. Um, and this idea of a two-state solution, I mean, that's a good example. I mean, they gave them Gaza. They gave it to them. They literally, the military, IDF, went into Gaza and forcibly removed Israelis that were living in Gaza. They basically already gave them the two-state solution, and they decided to install a murderous, demonic terrorist group to run the state that was given to them. Um, that doesn't mean that the autonomy of that state wasn't greatly limited over the course of those 20 years. But again, most of those measures came into effect, like the blockade and stuff, after Hamas, a terrorist organization, is who they elected to run Gaza. Um, so that's a separate conversation. Back to Nick Fuentes. So the biggest thing that bothers me about um, people losing it over the fact that Tucker Carlson interviewed Nick Fuentes is the fact that there have been other people in prior months that interviewed Nick Fuentes. And in fact, I think that's why Tucker Carlson felt that he was able to do so at this juncture, because he had sort of slowly been platformed to the point that it was palpable for someone of Carlson's stature to then go ahead and interview him. And those two people that I have seen, and there could have been others, are Candace Owens and Patrick David on their podcasts. Why did no one lose their shit when those two parties interviewed Tucker Carlson? I believe Candace Owens was the first one. Well, as we know, I affiliate myself with the right, but there is a little bit of truth to unconscious bias, and I hate to use one of these terms that's generally identified with woke madness, but that's what's going on there. Apparently, Candace Owens doesn't count because she's black, so it's okay if she wants to interview someone that people brand a white supremacist, and I think there's some credibility to that. Again, he said a lot of unhinged things in the past that I certainly don't agree with, and I think are indicative of some mental problems. But she interviewed him, not a word, nothing from the pews. Patrick Bet-David, a Persian American, he interviews him. In fact, he kind of tried to act like a father to him a little bit. He knows that he's a pretty smart guy and he's a tremendous speaker. No one, I think, that's really being legit can dispute that. He has that it factor, that charisma factor that we can't really quite put our finger on, but he's enjoyable to listen to. That when he's not, on some racist or unhinged like diatribe. um, and he can even be funny at times too. A lot of the unhinged things I spoke of before is when he thinks he's being funny, and that stuff is not. But he's a pretty well spoken individual overall. Uh, there's a lot of things that should not be coming out of his mouth, and that's why he's been deplatformed, and there's some justification for that. Myself, I believe that you either have freedom of speech or you don't. And unless you're making literal terroristic threats, well, and the irony in that is a lot of these Palestinian nut jobs that are literally taking to the streets, chanting terrorist, slogans and staunch support for Hamas would fall into this category. That unless you're making actual terroristic threats with the strong potential for those to be carried out either by you or other people, then you either have freedom of speech or you don't. And people might not like what you say. It might hurt their feelings. It could be completely incorrect, as with a lot of the things that he's come under fire for saying. But you need to be allowed to say it. And I don't think that if you're a public figure of stature like Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens, that you should be attacked for having someone on your podcast and platforming them. That's not free speech. But getting back to what I said, nothing from the pews when Candace Owens interviewed him or Patrick Bet-David. That is unconscious bias. They didn't have a problem with it because it wasn't another WASP interviewing someone that is branded a white supremacist. That's the truth of the matter. They didn't have a problem with it because of that. And that is sort of a kind of racist take on things that is the result of unconscious bias. And it really irritates me. And I wish people would just view, if you're going to espouse a true meritocracy and seeing things on the part, in terms of the content of people's character, then you either have that or you don't. And I could go on and on about this, but it gets into all sorts of different sociological things that I'm not going to go that in depth here. But I think I'm going to wrap things up here. I want to do a video. I read, so On Democracies and Death Cults was a Douglas Murray book that I recently read. And I also read his book, The Madness of Crowds, which that's a nice way to wrap things up because that ties into, in The Madness of Crowds, he talks about these sociological phenomenon and particularly kind of dissecting the woke movement and the left as it exists today. And, talks about things like unconscious bias and white privilege and, feminism and some of these other types of things. And it's a tremendous book. They are both tremendous, and I think I will do a review and a brief analysis of them at some point. Um, I think that's all I have to say at this point. Um, but yes, it really irritates me when, Patrick Bet-David, his podcast is pretty good. I watch it. Some of the guys he has on there irritate me a little bit. Candace Owens, I've always liked her. It really irritates me when my quote unquote side of the aisle basically doesn't see her as a conservative, and so she doesn't get the same blowback or attack for interviewing uh, an individual as Tucker Carlson gets, 6 weeks, 2 months later. Um, yeah. So, um, I guess that is all. A lot of things to cover in subsequent videos. Venezuela is certainly kind of continuing to heat up. We can talk about Israel, both on the Gaza Hamas front and also what is going on with Iran. But let's sign off here for now. And as always, thank you for watching. It's not fake news, it's faux news.